It is October. Craziness in the Kennel is just around the corner, and we are kicking off our player preview series talking about Ismaila Diagne, Gonzaga's next elite big man.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy October, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you will get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. So download the FanDuel app today. Well, folks, a very exciting episode here on Locked On Zags, my favorite podcast time of the year as we are beginning our player preview series. For those of you who are longtime or everyday listeners to Locked On Zags, first of all, I appreciate you. Second of all, you will remember this series. We do it every single year coming into the season where we talk about each player on Gonzaga's roster. The rotation players get their own full show as we are getting ready for the season. We talk about each player's history, how they ended up in Spokane. If they've played at Gonzaga, we'll talk about their previous time with the team as well. And then the second segment, we talk best and worst case scenarios for this player the upcoming season. And then we close out the show talking about the more realistic expectations, goals, what we think their role will look like, and their future. How many more years of eligibility do they have left? What does their role look like it's going to do in subsequent years? Are they a potential NBA player? All of that to close out the show. Today, we're talking big man Ismaila Diagne. Should be a real fun one. Full disclosure, I am recording this early as I'm going on vacation. Still no update for me as of right now regarding the status of Tyon Grant-Foster. Perhaps that has changed by the time you're listening to this, but part of the reason we chose to start with Ismaila Diagne is he is the player who seems to be least impacted by whether or not Grant-Foster is eligible this season. So I thought that'd be a good place to start. We'll start with Diagne's history. Ismaila Diagne is a 7-foot, 237-pound big man from Senegal who committed to Gonzaga in June of 2024. He was a late addition to what was an extraordinary offseason for Gonzaga last year. Didn't quite pan out the way that a lot had hoped that it would. If you go read the old articles from Diagne's commitment, it was all the excitement about Michael Ajayi and Caliph Battle and the additions that the team made. And, this is the start of an offseason where we're going to land players like Isaiah Harwell and Nick Kamenia. And so a lot of those things didn't quite happen and go the way that we had hoped that they would. But Diagne committed to Gonzaga and really was an exciting addition at the time because of his previous performance with Real Madrid. And he's a guy who averaged 10 points and nearly 8 rebounds per game playing for Real Madrid's U18 team. This was a team that featured Igor Demine, who played as a freshman last year at BYU and ended up becoming a first-round pick in the NBA draft. Hugo Gonzalez was also on that team. He was also a first-round pick in the NBA draft for the Boston Celtics. And Diagne was that team's 4th leading scorer and leading rebounder. He also spent some time in the ACB, which is one of the top basketball leagues overseas. Played 4 games there, averaged about 5 points, 4.5 boards. He also made 2 appearances in EuroLeague games. He's one of the youngest players ever to appear in a EuroLeague basketball game. A tremendous testament to his success internationally and the development that he had with that Real Madrid club since he was an early teenager. And speaking of early, Ismaila Diagne is young. This is going to come up a handful of times in today's show. He is younger than a typical sophomore. He is the same age as most freshmen. He will turn 19 in December of his sophomore year. He played in basketball games. He played against Baylor last year as a 17-year-old. It's very important to remember how young Ismaila Diagne is. All told, as a freshman, Diagne appeared in 10 games. He averaged 6.6 minutes, 3.4 points, 1.8 rebounds, half a steal, and 0.4 blocks per game. Again, because it was 10 games, those numbers are really easy to extrapolate. Ismaila Diagne played 66 minutes last year. He scored 34 points with 5 steals, and 4 blocks. His field goal percentage was off the charts, because he shot 12 of 15 from the field last year. That is 80% from the field and 83%, 10 of 12 from the free throw line. Breaking down his season a little bit more, you had a strong start to the year, primarily in garbage time minutes. That did include Gonzaga's game against Baylor to open up the season because there was garbage time in that game as Gonzaga walloped the Bears in that one. Diagne scored 4 points in 3 minutes in that game. He also had 5 points and 2 blocks in just 7 minutes against UMass Lowell. And then he scored 5 points with 3 steals, 2 rebounds, and a block in 9 minutes against Long Beach State. After that, Diagne had an MCL injury that took him out for about 2 months of action. He did not play from November 21st until January 24th, almost exactly 2 months later. There was also a concussion that he suffered during that time and an illness as well. So he just had a litany of things that prevented him from being on the floor for a huge chunk of Gonzaga's season last year. But then he returns from his injuries, he returns from his illness, and is able to play towards the end of the year and had 2 really phenomenal games. The first was 7 points, 3 rebounds, and a steal in 6 minutes against Pepperdine. And the next, this is the game that defined Ismaila Diagne's freshman season by a landslide. 18 of the 66 minutes that Diagne played as a freshman last year happened in a road game against Santa Clara in late February, where Ismaila Diagne was awesome. 9 points, 4 rebounds, a steal and a block in 18 minutes. He was a perfect 4 of 4 from the field. He was 1 of 1 from the free throw line. The Zags really needed him in this game. Graham Ike picked up his second foul late in the first half. Braden Huff subbed in for him. Braden Huff, who also already had 2 fouls, immediately jumps out on a 3-point shooter, commits a foul 27 feet away from the basket. Mark Few yanks him out of the game in frustration, does not want to put Graham back in the game, who is already tired and who already also has 2 fouls. So he thrusts Ismaila Diagne in the game. And from there, Ismaila Diagne played not the entire rest of the game, but played 18 minutes from that point forward. Braden Huff did not return to this game. And it was partly, I think, a bit of a message from Mark Few to Braden Huff, but also Diagne was so good in this game. And Gonzaga had already lost to Santa Clara earlier in the year, the home loss where Santa Clara hit like 700 threes in that game. And they were already down. They had been down double digits early in this game against Santa Clara on the road. And what happened when Diagne came in the game is because he is such a good rim protector for his size, and because he was already adept at navigating screens and hedging and forcing guards to go around him, it allowed Gonzaga to play more aggressively on the perimeter, knowing that they had more of a rim protector around the cup and somebody who didn't already have fouls tagged on them. And it completely changed the game. I watched the tape of this game. It's nice, by the way, when doing these player previews, I pretty much only had to watch one game in order to get the whole scope of Diagne's season. But I also read the phenomenal game recap from Theo Lawson, the Spokesman Review, which had quotes where Mark Few talked about how Diagne's already the best rim protector on the roster and how his presence in this game allowed them to do things differently. Herb Sendek talked about how great Diagne was in this game and how impactful he was on the defensive end of the floor. Diagne was very good offensively too. He was setting screens. He was rolling to the rim. Again, 4 of 4 from the field in this one. Just a tremendous performance. Hard to state. For those of you who watched this game, you remember just the jubilation that fans felt, not only for not blowing a second game against Santa Clara that year, but for finding something that we hadn't seen all year with an impactful defensive player around the rim, and knowing how young he was and how much excitement there is building around what he could become in a Gonzaga uniform. Wasn't much left for Diagne that season after that. He played just 14 more minutes across 3 games. He did play against San Francisco in the WCC tournament, picked up 2 fouls in about 40 seconds and didn't play after that. So there's a bit of the negative, the bad side for Diagne, still very raw and young. He played 2 points, or he scored 2 points and had 2 rebounds in 6 minutes against Georgia in his first and to date only NCAA tournament appearance. Now he heads into his sophomore season with a much bigger role expected in Gonzaga's front court. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Is Diagne primed to become Gonzaga's next great big man, or will he fade and not end up reaching that potential? We may not have the exact answer to that question after his sophomore season, but we're going to have a much better picture, and we're going to talk about what that might look like coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, Mazda crafts cards for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anybody else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. And Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel that incredible Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Nappa leather upholstery. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence throughout almost any season. Because with Mazda, everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like our players, Mazda sweats every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Folks, most people cannot name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's their 401k, their properties, or their investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. My wife and I love to be sure we are on the same page and keeping our finances up to date and in good shape. And Monarch makes that so simple for us because we can review our finances together. We can see our budgets, our goals, and our spending activity all in one place. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com using code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking Ismaila Diagne entering his sophomore season in a Gonzaga uniform. We talked about his history, what he did for Real Madrid, and what he did last year for Gonzaga, notably in his strong performance against Santa Clara. Now we're going to talk about the best and worst case scenarios for Ismaila Diagne this upcoming season. And I want to say this caveat for the first time. I will also say this caveat on every one of these player preview episodes. This is best case within reason, worst case without injury. And I stole that phrase directly from my good friend, Mike Richmond, who hosts the Locked On Blazers podcast, because I think it's an appropriate way to describe this. The best case scenario for every player is that they win the Wooden Award, that they are the leading scorer in college basketball, the first pick in the NBA draft, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to talk about best case scenarios that are not realistic. Similarly, the worst case scenario for any player is suffering a season-ending injury and not playing at all. If injuries are a part of a player's history and are relevant to the discussion, we will talk about it. Otherwise, we will ignore that as part of the worst case scenario. So for Ismaila Diagne, the best case scenario, I have called this the Karnowski. Ismaila Diagne takes that sophomore leap. The growth from year one to year two, which is so common in Gonzaga's development system, is clear and apparent for Ismaila Diagne all year long. I'll talk about why I called it Karnowski. Here are the per 40 numbers, which means that you extrapolate the season numbers based on playing exactly 40 minutes per game. Here are the per 40 numbers for Ismaila Diagne last year: 20.6 points, 10.9 rebounds, 2.4 blocks. The per 40 numbers for Przemek Karnowski as a freshman back in the 2012-13 season: 20.2 points, 9.9 rebounds, 1.2 blocks. Very, very similar. It is worth noting that Shem played 300 more minutes as a freshman than Diagne did. That is a huge difference and a very important caveat. But the point is, Przemek Karnowski was buried on the bench as a freshman, was pretty foul prone, was still learning how to use his body and his size, and he developed into one of the best bigs in Gonzaga basketball history over his 5 years in Spokane. The best case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is we start to see a trajectory that begins to look similar to that his sophomore year. Will we know if he's going to be an All-American caliber center after this year? Not necessarily, but we'll feel a lot more confident that it's possible after this year. The best case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that he is very clearly ready for a consistent nightly role as Gonzaga's third big man, playing 15 to 20 minutes per game. That night in and night out, he can play on the floor alongside Graham Ike, alongside Braden Huff, alongside Parker Jefferson, alongside Steele Venters, alongside Jalen Worley at the 4. Whoever Gonzaga's playing at the power forward position, Diagne can adjust to playing alongside them seamlessly. Now, part of that best case scenario depends on the other players. We need Graham Ike to be able to play the 4. We need, Worley or Venters to be able to play the 4 for that to work. But the best case scenario is that Diagne is able to contribute in his role and do his job regardless of who's playing next to him in the front court. The best case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that the experience that he gained playing professionally for Real Madrid makes him ready to contribute in a bigger role this year, despite the fact that he will be 18 for the first 10 or so games of Gonzaga's season, that he's not turning 19 until December. The best case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that he is Gonzaga's best rim protector, and he is one of the best rim protectors and defensive big men in the entire conference. That outside of maybe Harry Wessels over at St. Mary's, that he is the best rim protector in this conference. The best case scenario is that Ismaila Diagne's defense allows Gonzaga to be better defensively on the perimeter, something Mark Few alluded to specifically after that Santa Clara game, saying they were able to more effectively defend the perimeter because of Diagne's presence down low. Best case scenario is that he navigates ball screens extremely well, and his lateral mobility is good enough that if he does get caught in screens, if he does have to switch, he is capable of handling that. But more importantly, that he is hedging those screens, forcing guards to go all the way around his frame and allowing Gonzaga to adjust and reset defensively so that they do not get picked apart in those ball screen actions. The best case scenario is that the Zags are noticeably better defensively when he is on the floor. Looking at the offensive game for Ismaila Diagne, the best case scenario is that the development machine that Gonzaga has built in the front court is clearly working. Diagne's footwork around the rim and soft touch are improved from last year. Again, he shot 80% from the field last year. He is not going to improve on that. That would be shocking. Well outside the realm of possibility. If he plays a normal 15-minute per game role, he's not going to shoot 80% from the field. But if he shoots 70% on 2-pointers particularly, I don't expect a lot of threes from Ismaila Diagne, but if he's 70+% on 2-pointers next year and has got the touch around the rim, the footwork is improved. You can tell he's been working with Gonzaga's coaches. You can tell he's learned from Graham Ike and Braden Huff, and he's got that footwork, that touch, the ability to be a low post back to the basket scorer is something that we evidently see from him this year. The best case scenario is that Ismaila Diagne remains an excellent free throw shooter and develops into somebody who can draw contact, especially with his size. He should be getting fouled and getting to the free throw line regularly. Last year, Diagne averaged 7.3 free throw attempts per 40 minutes. That was second on the team behind Graham Ike. More free throw attempts per 40 minutes for Ismaila Diagne last year than Caleb Battle. Says a little bit about Caleb Battle and the lack of free throw attempts for him last year, but is a promising sign of Diagne's growth in that area if he can continue to do that. Doesn't need to shoot 83%, but 75 would be awesome for Diagne from the line. The best case scenario for Diagne is that he continues to run the floor well. He got a lot of transition opportunities last year, and this man at 7 feet with braces still in his mouth, flying up and down the floor and dunking on people, gave a lot of coaches nightmares last year. And the best case scenario is that he gives even more coaches nightmares this year as a more refined and polished player in his second season. The best case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that it's very clear that he is destined to be a great starter for this program, the next great big man. That the loss of Graham Ike, while it will still be difficult, will not be felt as dramatically because the excitement around Ismaila Diagne stepping into that role is palpable. That he is clearly on track to be that next great Zag big. Let's talk worst case scenarios for Ismaila Diagne. I called the best case scenario Shemet Karnowski. The worst case would be something like a Jakob Larson, who also had very good per 40-minute stats as a freshman and did not play for Gonzaga ever again. Obviously, that's not going to happen with Diagne, but the worst case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is effectively that his age, The fact that he's still 18 years old at the start of the season and that he's only played 66 minutes of Division I college basketball means that this year he's basically, quote, still a freshman. That sophomore leap doesn't happen because he really has not played a full freshman season, and he is not the age that you typically expect sophomores to be. That leap that he takes maybe doesn't happen till year 3. I don't think there's a worst case scenario for Diagne where he looks so lost on the floor that we're not even feeling like there's any development still to be had. That would be surprising. But the worst case is that, it didn't really show up this year. The worst case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that he cannot consistently provide Gonzaga with 15 to 20 minutes per game off the bench, whether that's a conditioning issue, whether that's foul trouble. Again, we're not talking injuries, but obviously that could be a factor here as well. But really, it's the fouls that I think are the biggest issue that could prevent Diagne from contributing on a regular basis for Gonzaga. And it forces the Zags to have to play a lot of small ball lineups or play a lot of Parker Jefferson. And again, I say forces. We're talking worst case scenarios for Ismaila Diagne. It's possible the worst case scenario for Gonzaga is not Parker Jefferson playing more minutes or Steele Venters playing more minutes at the 4. Again, to go back a few years, the worst case scenario for Efton Reed was what happened, which was that he got replaced in the starting or in the rotation 5 games into the season by Ben Gregg. That wasn't the worst case scenario for Gonzaga, but it was the worst case scenario for Efton Reed. In this case, the worst case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that Parker Jefferson jumps him in playing time because he is unable to consistently provide the amount of minutes necessary because he continues to pick up fouls. That feels like a likely worst case scenario for Diagne. The worst case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is he does not mesh well with the bigs. He doesn't play well with Graham Ike or with Braden Huff or with Parker Jefferson, which some combination of those players don't work well on the floor. Again, some of that is based on the other talent. Those guys have to be able to adjust to him, just like he has to be able to adjust to them. But in a worst case scenario, that does not happen. The worst case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that while his defensive upside is there, he's plagued by mobility issues and foul trouble. The worst case scenario is that Diagne, the glimpses we saw of him being a very good pick and roll defender are not there consistently. That certain teams are able to get him in switches or get him to commit fouls while trying to hedge those screens, or are able to take advantage of him defensively to the point where he is not playable against pick and roll offenses. The worst case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that offensive game is still just very raw, that he's a lob threat. He can set high ball screens, roll to the rim, score on lobs or dunks or easy shots around the cup, but that there's not a low post back to the basket game there. That when he's on the floor, he is not somebody that can post up. You can dump him the ball and facilitate the offense through him down low. And because of that, because Graham Ike and Braden Huff are better low post scorers, that forces Diagne to either be away from the rim offensively or just kind of out of the way in general, and he becomes somebody that's difficult to play because he lacks an offensive identity, which is frustrating because you're not getting the benefit of his defense on the floor because he's not doing enough on the other side of the ball. The worst case scenario is that lack of outside shooting clogs up Gonzaga's offense. Maybe he can set screens, but he can't pick and pop. He's got to roll to the rim. That clogs up the paint in a way that could be challenging for Gonzaga to navigate. The worst case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that the free throw shooting regresses and he's not able to contribute in that way to the point where maybe he is getting actively fouled in situations because he's not converting from the stripe. And then the worst case scenario for Diagne is that the future of Gonzaga's front court just feels murkier after this season. The loss of Graham Ike looms large. There's a desperation to make sure Braden Huff comes back for his senior year because there is concern about Ismaila Diagne stepping into that role. Maybe there's some development, but there's some skepticism rising among the fan base that, hey, is he going to be that guy who takes that leap in year 3 because we didn't see it in year 2? And some folks are wondering, hey, are we sure it's even going to happen? Well, let's take a look at the more realistic goals, realistic role and expectations for Diagne this upcoming season. And does he still have some NBA draft buzz? We're going to get to that to close out the show coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NFL season is here, and FanDuel's making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. One of the great things about FanDuel is that it fits however you like to bet, whether that's player props, building a same-game parlay, or even in jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just rooting for your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the best way to add a little bit more spice to your Sundays. FanDuel also has futures bets, Graham EK plus 5,000 to win the Wooden Award. That would certainly be a best case scenario for Graham. Zags plus 3,500 to win it all if you're feeling spicy. And if you're ready to play FanDuel, you can download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. Folks, you need to know that your favorite neighborhood spots, they run on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's the local sports bar packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows your order by heart, or the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. And when neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. So what does supporting a community look like? Spending money there doesn't just support the businesses, it supports the people behind it and the community all around it. Those local spots are what make the neighborhood feel like home, and so many of them run on Square. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockedoncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square. See you in the neighborhood. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we are closing out the show and the first episode in October here, talking about Ismaila Diagne. We talked about his history, how he ended up in Spokane after a very strong stint with Real Madrid, his freshman season, how he did. We then also talked about his best and worst case scenarios for this upcoming season. And now we're going to kind of land in the middle of those two tent poles and kind of talk about where we think his actual role and performance is going to be in his sophomore season. Ismaila Diagne is pretty clearly set up to be Gonzaga's third big this upcoming year. He is the backup center. Whether you call Graham EK or Braden Huff, the starting center is pretty irrelevant. Those two guys will start at the 5 and the 4, and Ismaila Diagne will likely be the first big off the bench. I say likely because it depends on Steele Venters' role. I could see Venters playing a lot of minutes at the 4. Again, some of this is dependent on the Tyon Grant Foster situation. But if Venters is playing a lot at the 4, he might be the third big in the sense that he plays more minutes. But Diagne is the third big and the backup center. Like, that's pretty clearly what is expected of him this upcoming season. Traditionally, the third big for Gonzaga is like a 15 to 20 minute per game role. Last year, Braden Huff played about 17 minutes per game, and he was the third big coming off the bench. And typically, when you look at other players who filled that role, they've kind of been right in that range. I think for Diagne, I think it's maybe more like 12 to 15 in the sense that I think that some foul issues will creep up enough, and Mark Few's being so unwilling to play guys with 2 fouls that I think that we'll see some games where Diagne picks up a couple quick ones and sits for a long period of time. And that combined with, games where they just let Graham or Braden cook because they're playing really well, and Parker Jefferson needing some minutes and Venters maybe playing the 4. I think that all leads to Diagne being maybe more in that 12 to 15 range as opposed to 15 to 20 by the end of the season in terms of his overall average. He'll have plenty of games where he's close to 20 minutes, plenty of games where he's more like 9 minutes, but I think he'll settle in around 14, 15. For Diagne, he will be Gonzaga's best rim protector. He was Gonzaga's best rim protector last year, and he only played 66 minutes. There's no real reason to think that that's going to be different this year. He's just going to be on the floor more. I do think consistency will be something we don't see. He will not be super consistent because he is, again, very, very young for his age and only played a little bit last year, only appeared in 10 games, really only had one game where he played more than 9 minutes per in the game. And that was that Santa Clara game. So we haven't seen him night in, night out, deliver 15-ish minutes per game. And I don't think we will see him play at a consistent level all the way through. Very, very few players are able to do that at his age and his experience level. And so I think that we will see some games where he looks great and some games where he looks borderline unplayable, like we saw last year, where like the next performance, I think it was not quite the next, I think it was 2 games after the Santa Clara game, he picked up 2 fouls in 40 seconds and was back on the bench. Like those, hopefully not that exact situation, but those kinds of highs and lows, I think, are to be expected for a player with his age, with his experience level, taking on a role this significant for Gonzaga. The other stuff for Diagne in terms of this upcoming season, I think offensively, I think defensively, he's going to be a good rim protector. He's going to be solid in those hedging those pick and rolls, and he's going to allow Gonzaga to do some different things defensively because of his length, because of his size and physicality down low. Offensively, I think he's going to be fairly limited to being a lob threat in the pick and roll. I don't envision that this is the year where Diagne is constantly down on the block, fighting for position, demanding the basketball, getting the ball, making a post move and scoring. In part because Gonzaga already has 2 bigs who do that extremely well in Graham Ike and Braden Huff. And I think having Diagne on the floor with one of those 2 guys the majority of the time limits his ability to impact the game that way. I think Diagne will primarily be used offensively, setting screens and rolling to the basket. He's not enough of an outside shooter to do a pick and pop. I think he's setting a screen, he's rolling to the rim. And if he's open, he's getting easy lobs, easy dunks, easy points around the rim. If he's not open, he's hopefully Braden Smith or Jalen Worley or whomever is able to make something work off of that screen. But I don't envision that low post back to the basket game. I'm not saying it won't be there at all, but I don't think it'll be a big part of his game this year, except for in those situations where maybe he's playing with Steel Venters, or even maybe he's playing with Parker Jefferson, and maybe they kind of let him start to work on that stuff. But I'm thinking that's maybe more of a year 3 thing, where you start to see that aspect of his game really molded and developed in time for that season, but not as much for this year. I think Diagne will ultimately end up being a candidate for WCC 6th Man of the Year. I don't think he'll play enough for Defensive Player of the Year, but I think 6th Man of the Year, he'll be in the mix. I think other Gonzaga players will be in the mix as well. Again, this does depend on the Grant Foster situation for that, but I don't think he'll ultimately be taking home any hardware yet, but I think he'll have a quality season. I don't love doing specific stat predictions, but I'll give you a range here. I think Diagne ultimately finishes the year around 16-ish minutes per game, 6-7 points per game, 4 to 5 rebounds per game, a little over a block per game, 65% from the field, hopefully 66% from twos. I don't think, again, we're going to see a lot of threes for Diagne, 75% from the free throw line. That's kind of where I expect his season to end up here in his second year in Spokane. And then in terms of the future, Graham Ike is done after this year. We know that. In theory, every other big could come back. Braden Huff comes back. He's the guy for 26-27. But I think Diagne starts alongside him. I think the plan for Gonzaga is that after this season, your starting front court is Braden Huff and Ismaila Diagne, with Parker Jefferson then stepping into that 3rd big role. Maybe you have freshman Sam Funches. If he ends up committing to the program, maybe he's your 4th big in that situation. I think that is the plan, and I think there's little reason at this point to assume that the Zags will need to deviate off of that plan, and it could lead to Diagne becoming the guy in the 27-28 season, which would be his senior year after Braden is gone, after, of course, Graham is gone. Diagne steps into that role as Gonzaga's low post dominant player. And like I said, Diagne has had NBA draft buzz already. He had draft buzz before he even committed to Gonzaga. That's what happens when you're 7 feet tall. You play for a prominent club in Real Madrid, and you become one of the youngest players to play in the EuroLeague. The glimpses we saw last year don't give us a really enough of a picture to know if there's an NBA profile here, but we'll know much more about that after this season. Ultimately, I see a player who could be a impactful rim protector at the NBA level, but who needs to prove that there's some kind of offensive versatility to his game and needs to prove that he can move laterally. Again, in the modern NBA, being a rim protector is great, but if you cannot defend pick and rolls, if you have to be used in drop coverage, your value in the NBA is severely limited. Ismaila Diagne is nowhere close to the offensive weapon that Zach Edey is, and Zach Edey's profile is limited at the next level because he has to play in drop coverage. If Diagne cannot defend laterally in pick and rolls, his NBA profile is severely impacted. We just don't have enough data points to know whether that's something he's going to be able to do. He looked good doing it last year when he caught a team completely off guard in an 18-minute sample size. It's just not enough to know a whole lot more than that. I would be very surprised if Ismaila Diagne is considering the NBA after this upcoming season. Zach Collins did go to the NBA after his freshman season and after he came off the bench. It can happen. I don't think it'll happen with Diagne, in part because if he has a good year and is getting some buzz, he knows that he could return to Gonzaga and take on a much bigger role as a junior. And I think that would be more enticing than going to the NBA after this year, unless he absolutely explodes, which just would probably require an injury or some other kind of significant change for that to happen for Gonzaga this year. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today. Here, our first of what will ultimately be 10 or 11 of these player preview episodes, talking about each player on the roster, their history, their best and worst case scenarios, and rounding it out with their future in Spokane. So much fun. I love these shows. Be back with a couple more shows this week, getting you ready for Craziness in the Kennel coming up this Saturday on October 4th. I cannot wait. After that, we'll talk about the recaps of the event, how it went, what we saw, what we liked, what we didn't like, and then we'll, of course, also keep going on these player previews, get the rest of these out here before the season starts in about a month on November 3rd against Texas Southern. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.